Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's video, I'll be sharing with you how I used piece activity and the art of making threat after threat to slowly push my opponent back and eventually end up trapping his queen in this game. So starting out, I played the London opening and my opponent decides to play c5 early on and trade on d4, and then he goes for this knight h5 idea. And in the game, I decide to preserve my dark squared bishop, aka the London bishop, by going back to e3. However, in this specific case, I had you could say a tactic of some sort where I would be much better. So if you don't see it immediately, I recommend you pause the video and try to find the idea. And I'll be revealing the move right now. It's bishop takes b8. And as I just mentioned before, you usually try to keep your dark squared bishop in the London because it's pretty key. But in this specific position, white gains a much better position after rook takes b8 and bishop b5 check, because here black has to play king e7 and basically bonk cloud early on, because if he doesn't and blocks the check with bishop d7, you can take, and after the trade you play knight e5, basically using the fact that the knight on h5 was undefended and in the side of the queen. You basically the sequence of taking on b8 and playing bishop b5 check was simply to bring the knight to e5 with tempo. And in this case, if black blocks with the light squared bishop, you can play knight e5, hit the queen, and the white queen is unleashed onto the h5 knight, and you'll be winning a piece and a game. So going back, black would have been forced to bonk cloud, and this is a much better position again, probably playing knight e5. And once he goes back to f6, a move like c4, basically opening up the center pretty quickly. White is going to be castling here pretty soon, and all of his pieces are going to be coming to action, like rook c1, queen b3, or queen a4, or queen c2. It honestly depends, but just bringing your queen out and trying to target this black king. So going back, I unfortunately missed this and I played bishop e3, and then my opponent went back to f6, basically because now the knight really had no point on h5. I play knight e5, and knight e5 in general is a common theme in the London system, where the knight, you basically place the knight on a more active square. And here my opponent plays knight bd7, and I decide to go back to f4 because usually, in my opinion, the dark square bishop is better placed on f4 in the London. And in this case, my opponent didn't have knight h5 again to bug my dark square bishop, because I played knight e5, and that was also another reason to keep my queen free and basically stop knight h5. And I really didn't lose tempo because black also kind of lost tempo playing h5 and then going back. And so here my opponent decides to trade on e5. I take with the pawn because usually if you have a pawn on e5, it's easier to attack as white in the future against the king side, mainly because you'll be removing the f6 knight defender. And as you see, that is what happens in this game. My opponent has to go back with knight d7, and I play bishop d3 again. And you might already be seeing that I'm trying to set up some sort of classical bishop sacrifice with knight f3 on the next move, and if black ever ends up castling. So my opponent plays bishop c5, I play knight f3, and here if castles, I have the option of considering classical bishop sacrifice, and I think it should be working here. Yeah, and after bishop takes h7, king takes, knight g5, and the queen is coming to h5. This should be winning for white. So going back, my opponent, realizing that, decides to play queen b6 first, and at first sight it looks like I am losing a pawn because it's a double attack on f2 and b2. But here I simply castle, and my intentions are to basically gambit this pawn and basically get a lead in development. As you see here already, all my minor pieces are nicely developed, and you can say are on active squares, and sooner or later my queen is also going to move, the rooks are going to connect, and I'll start to play moves like c4 and try to open up the center and hit this king which is stuck in the center. And if he decides to castle, that's when all these sorts of ideas of playing the classical bishop sacrifice and trying to attack on the king side come in, especially given that most his pieces are on the queen side. So this is like a prime position where you can attack on the king side if black castle is there. So here black first plays h6, trying to stop any classical bishop sacrifice ideas. Here I basically continue with c4, trying to break open the center, and since my pieces are more active, I thought opening up the center would create more play and allow my rooks to come in and put some more pressure. So here my opponent takes, I take back with the bishop, and here he plays queen b4 instead of taking my pawn on b2, and here I play queen e2, and it's actually a mistake or blunder, you can say, because here I missed the fact that he can still play b5, and the idea being is that both my bishops are on the 4th rank, and black is utilizing this to sacrifice a pawn and win a piece. Now here I have two moves, and even bishop takes b5 actually works out because I do lose a piece temporarily, but due to my basically superior piece activity and the fact that black's king is still in the center, I can win it back. So first I play rook ac1, attacking the dark squared bishop, and once it moves back, I can bring my other rook, and here you can see that I'm using, oops, can't draw arrows. So I'm using the pin and putting pressure on it, and black really can't castle without losing a piece, but it is important he castles soon because I have all sorts of nasty threats lined up and he has to castle soon. So after he castles, I first play g3, kicking the queen out of sight from c1, which is looking at basically my rook, which would be undefended if I try to win the piece back. And once the queen moves, I take on d7, and I do end up a pawn, but black should be able to continue to play. I mean, his dark squared bishop is nicely placed, his rooks are gonna also be active, so it's still a game, honestly. Going back, when he plays b5, I also have this interesting move, queen e4, counter-attacking the rook, and once the rook moves, I can play bishop d3, protecting my queen, and again it's a trade. And the reason why allowing b5 was a blunder is because now I end up trading queens, or in the other line I end up giving black, I allow black to be more active, and in both cases I lose my firepower I had before, where my pieces were active and he was still kind of stuck in the center with his king and his pieces are kind of inactive. So what I should have done instead was play b3, and if he plays a move like b5, I could play a3 and kick his queen out, and I should be fine here. But okay, I played queen e2, he missed the opportunity to play b5, and he castled kingside, and now I basically continue to make threat after threat because I have my pieces active, rooks are connected, queen is out, pieces are actively placed. So a3 first, basically trying to get in b4 next move and expand space on the queen side. He goes back to b6, I play b4, and I push the bishop back to a less active square. So if you look, earlier was on c5, a really nice square, honestly, looking at my king on g1, pinning that f2 pawn, more importantly just putting pressure on it. But now I play b4, I kick it back to e7 where it's more passive, and I go back to d3. And the reason is I want to play queen e4 and threaten mate in one, basically creating threat after threat and using my active pieces to cause some trouble. Here my opponent plays rook e8, and I continue with my plan. And if you just take a brief pause in this position, if you just see, my queen is really active in the center, light square bishop is really nicely paired, knight on f3 is really nicely placed. Again, it can jump to these squares anytime, of course not g5 immediately, but if I ever want to play g4 g5, this knight on f3 is well placed. And again, this dark square bishop is ready to get into action for any future sacrifices. So that's my position. Rooks are connected as well, pawn on queenside structure is nicely placed. Black, however, again, rooks are disconnected, the bishop on c8 is passive, knight on d7 doesn't really do much, it got kicked out of f6, bishop got kicked back. So this is what you want to do in your games, basically try to create threat after threat and press forward with initiative. Again, moves like a3, b4 expanding with tempo, and this is what I'm trying to stress. So try to find threats in your games and try to find basically the most optimal piece placements. Like as you saw, I went back to d3 in this case because bishop on c4 doesn't do much honestly on this diagonal, because there is this pawn chain on e6 and f7. So again, going back to d3 was a conscious decision, aligning it towards the king. So okay, in the game my opponent played knight f8, defending against the mate threat, but now here I play rook fd1 because here I saw the idea of playing e3 and try to trap the queen, but I realized that my opponent can just go back to d8 and he would be fine. But if I played first a sneaky move first, rook f d1 basically, where if he goes back to d8 I would have some potential discoveries. I realized that'd be a nice way to set up bishop e3, and I'm also just bringing the rook to a much more active square basically onto the open file. My opponent plays a6 and I bring the other rook again to the open file. It just looks like I'm activating my rooks, which is a good thing, but there's also the sneaky threat of cutting off again the c7 square this time for the queen. So now bishop e3 is threatening to basically trap the queen. And here my opponent doesn't see that, plays bishop d8 for whatever reason, perhaps trying to somehow reroute, maybe queen a7, bishop b6, I'm not sure, or possibly queen a7 and then b5 and then bishop b7, bishop b6, all these sorts of stuff. But I was much more ahead in terms of development and space, initiative whatsoever, and I play bishop e3 and I end up trapping the queen in this position. And here my opponent has no good moves. He plays f5 trying to counterattack, but I simply take on f6 and I'm going for the queen and the king at this point. And this is what you get for playing active chess, because slowly you'll start to put more pressure on your opponent, push his pieces back, and at some point they'll just crumble under this pressure. I mean, if you look at this position, rooks are not connected, the bishops are passively placed. I mean, out of all the pieces he has, basically all of them are on the 8th rank, except the black queen, which is trapped. So there's really no point of it being here on b6. And again, the pawn I mentioned earlier being on e5 is nice for attacking, and this is the reason why here I take with en passant. And again, black is absolutely toasted here and he resigned. So I hope you learned something from this game, and if you want to keep on learning how to activate your pieces or create threat after threat, watch my other videos on my channel where I show many other games where I slowly start putting pressure on my opponent and they eventually end up crumbling. So that's it for today. See you next time, and bye. Take care.